I'm carrying a tray of champagne glasses through my own engagement party, wearing an apron over my dress, while my future mother-in-law's friends laugh and order me around like I'm the hired help. My name is Sloane Mercer, and this is supposed to be the celebration of my engagement to Trevor Caldwell. Instead, I'm being treated like a servant in front of 80 guests because Trevor's mother decided I needed to prove I can handle hosting duties. The tray is heavy. My arms are shaking. One of the women, a blonde in a designer dress, snaps her fingers at me. "You there, more champagne. And make sure it's actually cold this time." I want to throw the entire tray in her face. Instead, I smile and say, "Of course. Let me back up and explain how I ended up serving drinks at my own engagement party. I met Trevor Caldwell 8 months ago at a charity auction. I was there representing the nonprofit I work for, Urban Youth Education Initiative. We provide after-school programs and college prep for underserved communities. I'm the program director making $52,000 a year, and I love what I do." Trevor was there because his family always attends these events. The Caldwells are Philadelphia old money, banking family going back 4 generations. Trevor himself works at the family bank in some vague executive role that seems to involve a lot of golf and client dinners. We hit it off immediately. He was charming, funny, seemed genuinely interested in my work. We started dating, and for the first few months, everything was perfect. Then I met his mother, Beatrice Caldwell. Beatrice is everything you'd expect from old money Philadelphia society. She sits on charity boards, hosts fundraisers, summers in Martha's Vineyard, and has very specific ideas about what kind of woman her son should marry. I was not that kind of woman. Our first meeting was at the Caldwell family home, a massive estate in the main-line suburbs. The house had more rooms than I could count and staff who actually lived on the property. Beatrice greeted me with a handshake that lasted exactly 2 seconds, then proceeded to interview me like I was applying for a job. Where did I go to college? State school. What did my parents do? My father was a high school teacher, my mother a nurse. Both deceased now. What did I do for work? Non-profit work with at-risk youth. Any family money? Well, she didn't say I wasn't good enough. She didn't have to. Her face said it all. Over the next few months, Beatrice made her feelings clear through 1,000 small cuts. She'd correct my manners at dinner. She'd forget to include me in family events. She'd introduce me to people as Trevor's friend, even after we got engaged. When Trevor proposed, he did it privately, just the 2 of us at the park where we'd had our first date. It was perfect, intimate, everything I wanted. When we told his family, his father William was politely congratulatory. His younger sister Ashley seemed genuinely happy. Beatrice said, "Well, I suppose we should plan an engagement party then." She took over the planning immediately. Didn't ask what I wanted, where I wanted it, who I wanted to invite. Just informed me that the party would be at their estate, with their guest list, and I should wear something appropriate. When I tried to invite my friends, my co-workers, people who actually knew me, Beatrice said the guest list was already full. "Besides," she said, "Trevor's professional connections need to meet you. It's important for his career." The day of the engagement party, I arrived at the Caldwell estate early to help set up. Trevor was supposed to be there, but he'd gotten called into work for some emergency. Beatrice met me at the door with a catering uniform in her hands. She said, "The caterers are short-staffed. You'll need to help serve." I said, "I'm sorry, what?" She said, "The party starts in 2 hours. We don't have enough servers. Surely you don't mind helping out." I said, "This is my engagement party." She said, "And you want it to go well, don't you? A good hostess does whatever's necessary to ensure her guests are taken care of." I should have refused. I should have called Trevor immediately. But I didn't want to cause problems, didn't want to be difficult, didn't want to give Beatrice more ammunition to use against me. So I put on the apron and started helping in the kitchen. First it was just prep work. Arranging hors d'oeuvres, organizing serving trays, things that could pass as helping out. But then the guests started arriving, and Beatrice handed me a tray of champagne. She said, "Start circulating." Make sure everyone has a drink. I said, Beatrice, I need to change and greet guests. This is my party. She said, the guests are here for Trevor, not you. Now please, the champagne is getting warm. I looked around for Trevor. He still wasn't there. I took the tray and started serving, telling myself I'd do this for just a few minutes until Trevor arrived and put a stop to it. But Trevor didn't arrive. And the minutes turned into an hour. And that's how I ended up carrying drinks through my own engagement party, wearing an apron, being treated like staff by people who should have been meeting me as Trevor's fiancé. If you're hooked on this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. One of Beatrice's friends, a woman named Constance, grabbed a champagne glass from my tray and said, "Tell me, where did Beatrice find such dedicated help? You're quite efficient." I said, "I'm actually." Beatrice appeared beside me and interrupted. "She's new. Still learning. Sloane, the kitchen needs more hors d'oeuvres brought out." Constance didn't even register my name. Just waved me away like I was furniture. In the kitchen, I finally pulled out my phone and called Trevor. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding stressed. "Sloane, I'm still at the office. This client situation is a disaster. I'll be there as soon as I can." I said, "Your mother has me serving drinks at our engagement party." He said, "What?" I said, "She gave me a catering uniform and has me working as a server. Everyone thinks I'm staff." He said, "That can't be right. Mom wouldn't do that." I said, "Trevor, I'm literally in the kitchen right now holding a tray of crab cakes. Your mother told me to circulate." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can you just go along with it for now? I'll be there in an hour and we'll sort everything out. I can't leave this meeting early. It's a major client." I said, "You want me to keep serving at my own engagement party?" He said, "Just for a little while. Please, Sloane. I'll make it up to you." I hung up without responding. I stood in that kitchen, holding that tray, and realized something important. Trevor wasn't going to stand up to his mother. He was going to ask me to keep the peace, to be understanding, to not cause problems. This was my future. This was what being married to Trevor would look like. I took off the apron and walked back into the party. Beatrice saw me immediately and approached with a tight smile. She said, "Where's your apron? And where are the crab cakes?" I said loud enough that several people nearby could hear, "I'm not serving anymore. I'm the guest of honor at this engagement party, and I'd like to be introduced as Trevor's fiancé, not treated as hired help." Beatrice's face went rigid. She said quietly, "You're making a scene." I said, "You made me serve drinks at my own party. That's a scene." She said, "Keep your voice down." I said, "Where's Trevor?" She said, "He's handling business. Like a responsible adult." I said, "He knows you have me working as a server and he asked me to go along with it." That surprised her, but she recovered quickly. She said, "Then perhaps you should respect his wishes." I said, "Or perhaps you should respect that I'm going to be your son's wife, not your servant." Ashley, Trevor's sister, had been watching this exchange. She came over and said, "Mom, what's going on? Why is Sloane dressed like that?" Beatrice said, "The caterers were short-staffed. Sloane was helping out." Ashley looked at me, then at her mother, and her face showed understanding. She said, "Mom, tell me you didn't." Beatrice said, "I don't know what you're implying." Ashley said to me, "How long have you been serving?" I said, "Since before the party started. Over an hour." Ashley turned to her mother, anger flashing across her face. "This is unbelievable. Even for you." Beatrice said, "Ashley, this is not your concern." Ashley raised her voice, addressing the nearby guests. "Everyone, can I have your attention please? There's been a terrible misunderstanding. This is Sloane Mercer, my brother Trevor's fiancée. She's the reason we're all here tonight. My mother accidentally had her helping with catering, but she is absolutely not staff. She's family." The nearby guests looked confused, embarrassed. Several of them had been ordering me around for the past hour. Constance, the woman who'd complimented my efficiency, looked mortified. Beatrice pulled Ashley aside, speaking in a harsh whisper that I could still hear. "What do you think you're doing?" Ashley said. "Fixing your mess." "What were you thinking?" Beatrice said. "I was teaching her what it means to be part of this family. If she can't handle a little hard work." Ashley said. "You humiliated her at her own engagement party. Trevor is going to be furious." Beatrice said. "Trevor will understand I was testing her character." I'd heard enough. I walked away from both of them, heading toward the front door. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to think about whether I could actually marry into this family. I was standing on the front steps of the estate when I heard it. Helicopter. It was getting louder, closer, clearly heading toward the property. Guests started coming outside, curious about the noise. The helicopter circled once, then landed on the lawn, the kind of dramatic entrance that only happens in movies or when obscenely wealthy people arrive. I watched, confused, as the helicopter door opened. A man stepped out in an expensive suit, his hair slightly mussed from the flight. He was tall, confident, and despite the years and the expensive clothes, unmistakably familiar. It was my brother, Jonah. I hadn't seen Jonah in person in almost 3 years. We'd talked on the phone occasionally, texted more often, but he was always somewhere else, always busy with work, always promising to visit but never quite making it happen. Jonah and I had grown up together in a modest middle-class home in Pittsburgh. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 19 and he was 23. We only had each other after that. Jonah had been brilliant, gotten a full scholarship to MIT, studied computer science and business. After graduation, he started a tech company with 2 classmates. I didn't really understand what they did, something about data analytics and AI. What I did understand was that the company had been acquired 3 years ago for $2.4 billion. Jonah's share was about $800 million. My brother was a billionaire, and I'd been serving drinks at my engagement party. Jonah walked across the lawn toward me like he owned the place. Several guests had their phones out, clearly recognizing him from business news. He reached the steps where I was standing and said, "Sloan, you didn't tell me I needed a formal invitation to your engagement party." I said, "Jonah, what are you doing here?" He said, "Ashley called me. Said you were having some issues with your future in-laws." I looked at Trevor's sister, who was standing near the door with a small smile on her face. Jonah said, "She said something about you serving drinks? That can't be right." I said, "It's complicated." He looked at the apron I was still holding. "Not that complicated." Beatrice had come outside, looking at Jonah with confusion and calculation. She said, "I'm Beatrice Caldwell, Trevor's mother." "And you are?" Jonah said. "Jonah Mercer, Sloane's brother." Beatrice's expression changed as she recognized the name. "The Jonah Mercer. From Vertex Analytics." Jonah said, "That's me. Sorry I'm late to the party. I was in Tokyo closing a deal and had to fly back. Took a helicopter from the airport because traffic on the 95 is terrible this time of day." He turned to me. "So tell me, why were you serving drinks at your own engagement party?" Every guest was watching now. This was the most entertainment they'd had all evening. I said quietly, "Beatrice said the caterers were short-staffed." Jonah said, "And where was Trevor during this?" I said, "At the office." Jonah's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed casual. "Interesting. So my sister, who runs a non-profit serving underprivileged kids, who has 2 graduate degrees, who could have done anything with her life but chose to dedicate herself to helping others, was serving champagne to strangers at her own engagement party while her fiancé was at work and his mother watched." Beatrice said, "It was a misunderstanding." Jonah said, "No, I don't think it was. I think you wanted to put my sister in her place. Show her that she's not good enough for your family. Remind her that she comes from nothing." He said, "What you didn't know is that Sloan comes from the same nothing I do. And I took that nothing and built an $800 million fortune. So if we're measuring worth by bank accounts, which I suspect you were, my sister is worth more than everyone at this party combined. The crowd was silent. Beatrice said, I assure you our family wealth is quite substantial. Jonah said, the Caldwell family is worth about $150 million, most of it tied up in the bank and real estate. I checked before I flew here. That's a nice amount of money, but it's not my money. He looked at me. Sloan, do you want to marry Trevor? I said honestly, I don't know anymore. He said, then let's give you some space to figure it out. Come on. He held out his hand. I took it and we walked toward the helicopter. Beatrice said, wait, you can't just leave. This is your engagement party. Jonah said, it stopped being her engagement party when you put her in a catering uniform. We're leaving. Trevor's car pulled into the driveway at that exact moment. He got out, looking confused at the helicopter, the crowd on the lawn, Jonah and me walking away. He said, Sloan, what's going on? I stopped and turned to him. I said, your mother had me serving drinks for the past 2 hours. Called you. You told me to go along with it because you couldn't leave work. Trevor looked at his mother, who was trying to look innocent. Mom, is that true? Beatrice said. I asked her to help with a staffing shortage. It wasn't. Trevor said. You had my fiancée working as a server at her own party? Beatrice said. I was testing her. Trevor said. Testing her? That's insane. But he said it without real force, without the anger the situation deserved. Jonah said. Is that all you've got, Caldwell? Your mother humiliated your fiancé and you're going with, that's insane? Trevor said. This is between me and Sloan. Jonah said. No, it became my business when my sister was treated like staff at what should have been a celebration. Here's what's going to happen. Sloan is coming with me. You want to talk to her? You can call her tomorrow after she's had time to think. Trevor said. Sloan, please. Don't leave. We can work this out. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was embarrassed, uncomfortable, but not truly angry on my behalf. I said, you chose a work meeting over my dignity. Your mother tests me like I'm a servant, and you tell me to go along with it. I can't marry someone who won't stand up for me. Trevor said, I do stand up for you. I said, when? When have you ever put me first over your mother's approval, or your work, or your family's expectations? He didn't have an answer. I turned and walked to the helicopter with Jonah. As we lifted off, I looked down at the party, at Trevor standing on the lawn looking up at us, at Beatrice already herding guests back inside to manage the gossip, at Ashley giving us a thumbs up. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, drop a like and let me know in the comments if you've ever had a sibling come through for you when it mattered most. In the helicopter, Jonah handed me a bottle of water and said, You okay? I said, I think I just ended my engagement. He said, Good. He wasn't good enough for you anyway. I said, You met him for 30 seconds. He said, I saw him let his mother humiliate you and then ask you to accept it. That's all I needed to see. I started crying then. Not pretty tears but big ugly sobs. Jonah let me cry, didn't try to fix it, just sat there while I processed everything. When I finally stopped, he said, Ashley sent me videos. Of you serving drinks, of people ordering you around. She sent them 3 hours ago, but I was mid-flight from Tokyo. He showed me his phone. There were several short clips of me carrying trays, taking orders from guests, looking miserable. He said, She said she tried to intervene but her mother shut her down. So she called me. I said, How did she even know about you? He said, Apparently she Googled you after Trevor proposed. Found out about me, about Vertex, about the acquisition. She's been trying to convince Trevor to stand up to his mother for months. The helicopter landed at a private airport. There was a car waiting. Jonah said, I've got a suite at the Rittenhouse. You're staying with me tonight. Tomorrow we'll deal with Trevor and get your stuff from his place. I said, I have my own apartment. He said, Trevor has a key, right? He nodded. He said, Then tonight you stay with me. We'll change your locks tomorrow. At the hotel, Jonah ordered room service while I showered and changed into clothes he'd had someone buy in my size. I didn't ask how he knew my size. He'd always been that kind of brother, paying attention to details. Over dinner he said, "Tell me about Trevor. The real story, not the version you've been telling yourself." So I did. I told him about the early romance, about how charming Trevor had been, about how I'd ignored the red flags with his mother. I told him about the times Trevor chose work over me, about how he'd cancel plans for client dinners, about how he'd side with his mother to avoid conflict. I told him about feeling like I was always auditioning for a role in his life instead of being an equal partner. Jonah listened to all of it, then said, "You know you deserve better." I said, "I thought I could make it work." He said, "Some things aren't meant to work. Not every relationship is salvageable." He said, "You've spent your whole career advocating for kids who deserve better. Maybe it's time you advocated for yourself." That hit hard. I said, "When did you get so wise?" He said, "I've been in therapy for 3 years. Turns out becoming obscenely wealthy doesn't solve your childhood trauma." I laughed, which felt good after crying. He said, "I'm sorry I haven't been around more. After the acquisition, everything got crazy. I was building new companies, doing deals, traveling constantly. I let work consume me." He said, "But when Ashley called and told me what was happening, I realized I'd been a terrible brother. You needed me and I wasn't there." I said, "You're here now." He said, "From now on I'll be here more. No more excuses." The next morning, Trevor called 37 times. I didn't answer. He texted, "Please call me. We need to talk. I'm sorry about yesterday. My mother is in the wrong," I told her that. "Don't throw away what we have over one bad day." Jonah saw me reading the texts and said, "What's your gut telling you?" I said, "That one bad day revealed what all our days would be like." His mother would interfere, he'd try to keep the peace, and I'd be expected to accept whatever she dished out. He said, "So what do you want to do?" I said, "End it. Officially." He said, "Want backup?" I said, "Always." We drove to Trevor's apartment, where I'd been staying most nights. Trevor was there waiting, looking like he hadn't slept. He said, "Sloan, thank God. We need to talk." I said, "We do. I'm ending our engagement." He said, "You can't be serious." I said, "I'm completely serious. Yesterday showed me what our marriage would look like. Your mother controlling everything, you choosing the path of least resistance, me expected to accept humiliation to keep the peace." Trevor said, "Yesterday was an anomaly. My mother made a terrible choice. I've talked to her, she understands she was wrong." I said, "She understands she got caught. There's a difference." He said, "I love you." I said, "That's not enough. Love without respect, without protection, without being willing to set boundaries with your family, that's not the kind of love I want." Trevor saw Jonah standing in the doorway. He said, "Is this because of your brother? Did he convince you to leave me?" Jonah said, "I don't need to convince her of anything. Your mother did that all on her own." Trevor said, "This is between me and Sloan." I said, "No, Jonah is here because I asked him to be. Because unlike you, he actually shows up when I need him." I took off my engagement ring and held it out. Trevor didn't take it. He said, "Sloan, please. Don't do this. We can work through it." I said, "I spent yesterday serving drinks at my own party because your mother decided to test me, and you told me to go along with it. That's not something we work through. That's who you are." I set the ring on his coffee table. I said, "I'll send movers for my stuff. Don't contact me again." Trevor looked devastated, but he didn't fight anymore. As Jonah and I walked to the car, Trevor called out, "You're making a mistake." I said, "The only mistake I made was ignoring the red flags for 8 months." In the car, Jonah said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Lighter. Sad but lighter." He said, "That's healthy." Over the next week, Jonah stayed in Philadelphia. We had dinner every night, caught up on 3 years of missed conversations, rebuilt the sibling relationship that had gotten lost in his success and my relationship drama. He met my coworkers, visited the nonprofit, even donated $5 million to the organization. He said, "You're changing kids' lives. This work matters. I should have supported it years ago." On his last night in town, we had dinner at a nice restaurant. Quiet, private, just the two of us. He said, "I've been thinking about something." I said, "That's dangerous." He said, "I want you to join Vertex. Not in operations but heading up our corporate foundation. We give away about $50 million a year, but it's not strategic. It's just writing checks to whoever asks." He said, "You understand nonprofits, you understand impact, you understand how to make money matter. I want you to build a foundation that actually changes things." I said, "Jonah, I can't just leave my job." He said, "The salary is $250,000 plus benefits. You'd have full control over grant decisions. You'd be building something from scratch." I said, "That's a lot of money." He said, "It's what the position is worth. You'd be managing a $50 million annual budget. That's not nepotism, that's the market rate." Thought about it. Then I said, "Can I think about it?" He said, "Take all the time you need. The offer stands whenever you're ready." 3 months after the engagement party disaster, I took the job at Vertex. It was terrifying and exciting and nothing like I'd imagined my career would look like. I built the foundation from scratch, hired a team, developed grant criteria focused on education access, youth development, and community building. We made our first grants 6 months in. $15 million to organizations across the country, all doing work that mattered. One of the organizations we funded was Urban Youth Education Initiative, my old nonprofit. They used the grant to expand to 3 new cities. I ran into Trevor once, about a year after our breakup. He was at a charity event that Vertex was sponsoring. He approached me and said, "Sloan, you look well." I said, "Thank you. How are you?" He said, "Good. Engaged, actually. Getting married in the spring." I said, "Congratulations." He said, "She's from a good family. My mother approves." There was something sad about the way he said it, like he was checking boxes instead of celebrating love. He said, "I think about that day sometimes. The engagement party. I should have stood up for you." I said, "Yes, you should have." He said, "Would it have made a difference if I had?" I thought about it honestly. Maybe. But probably not long term. You'd have stood up to your mother that once. But eventually you'd have gone back to avoiding conflict. That's who you are. He said, "And you needed someone different." I said, "I needed someone who saw me as an equal partner, not as someone to manage around their family's expectations." He said, "Did you find that?" I said, "I'm not looking for it. I'm building a career I love, working with my brother, making impact. That's enough." 2 years after the engagement party, Jonah and I were featured in a business magazine together. The Mercer Siblings. How one billionaire and his sister are reinventing philanthropy. The article talked about Vertex Foundation, about the grants we'd made, about the measurable impact we were having. It included a photo of Jonah and me at a youth center we'd funded, surrounded by kids. The article quoted me, "My brother built an incredible company. Now we're using those resources to build incredible futures for young people who deserve a chance." It quoted Jonah, "Sloan reminds me why the work matters. She keeps us focused on impact over ego." Beatrice Caldwell sent me a letter after the article came out. It was 2 pages long, mostly justifying her behavior at the engagement party, insisting she'd been trying to help, claiming she'd always respected me. The last paragraph said, "Trevor's marriage is struggling. I suspect he made a mistake choosing someone I approved of over someone he actually loved. Perhaps I was wrong about what my son needed." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close. I showed it to Jonah and said, "What do you think?" He said, I think she's realizing that treating people like servants has consequences. I said, should I respond? He said, only if you want to. You don't owe her anything. I decided not to respond. Some people don't deserve your energy, even to reject them. 3 years after the helicopter arrival that changed everything, Vertex Foundation had given away $180 million and built partnerships with over 300 organizations. I'd hired a team of 15 people, all passionate about education and youth development. I'd published a book about effective philanthropy that became required reading in nonprofit management programs. And I'd started dating someone new, a professor I'd met at a foundation conference. He was smart and kind and completely unimpressed by my brother's billions. On the anniversary of that terrible engagement party, Jonah flew in for dinner. He said, remember 3 years ago when I landed a helicopter on the Caldwell lawn? I said, how could I forget? You made quite an entrance. He said, best use of a helicopter I've ever had. Better than any business deal. I said, you saved me that day. Not just from the party, but from a marriage that would have slowly crushed me. He said, Ashley saved you. I just provided transportation. I said, you provided perspective. You reminded me I was worth more than how Trevor and his mother treated me. He said, you always were. You just forgot for a while. He raised his glass. To terrible engagement parties and helicopter rescues. I raised mine. And to brothers who show up when it matters. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for being here. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Drop a like if this resonated with you, and let me know in the comments about a time someone rescued you from a bad situation. 4 years after that engagement party, I was invited to speak at a philanthropy conference. The topic was From Humiliation to Purpose: How Personal Experience Shapes Giving. I told the story of the engagement party, of being forced to serve drinks at my own celebration, of my billionaire brother landing in a helicopter, of walking away from a relationship that diminished me. I talked about how that experience shaped my approach to philanthropy, how being treated as less than made me understand the importance of dignity in charitable work. I said, when you've been on the receiving end of disrespect, you understand viscerally why respect matters. Why treating people with dignity isn't optional. Why power dynamics in philanthropy can either empower or diminish. After the talk, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous. She said, I was at your engagement party. Sorry. I was one of the people who ordered you around. I didn't know you were the guest of honor. I didn't remember her specifically, but I said, it's okay. You didn't know. She said, but I should have questioned it. When I saw someone who looked uncomfortable serving drinks, I should have asked instead of just accepting it. She said, your story made me realize how often I participate in systems that diminish people without even noticing. That's when I knew the experience hadn't just changed my life. It had become a teaching moment about power, dignity, and what happens when we question assumptions instead of accepting them. 5 years after the engagement party, Jonah got married. His wife Sarah was a pediatric oncologist, brilliant and compassionate. They'd met when Jonah was funding cancer research and she was presenting on childhood leukemia. At their wedding, Jonah asked me to give a toast. I stood up and said, 5 years ago, my brother landed a helicopter on my ex-fiancé's lawn and rescued me from the worst party of my life. The room laughed. I said, he reminded me that day that I deserved better than how I was being treated. That family shows up for family. That real love means protecting people, not asking them to accept disrespect. I said, watching him with Sarah, I see those same values. He shows up for her. He protects her. He treats her as an equal partner in building their life together. I raised my glass. To Jonah and Sarah, who show us what real partnership looks like. Later that night, Jonah found me on the terrace. He said, thank you for the toast. I said, I meant every word. He said, do you ever regret not marrying Trevor? I said honestly, never. Not even once. He said, good. Because I would have landed that helicopter on his lawn even if you'd gone through with the wedding. I laughed. That would have been quite a scene. He said, some people need dramatic interventions to see what they're worth. I said, and some people need brothers willing to provide those interventions. 6 years after the engagement party, I got a call from Ashley, Trevor's sister. She said, I thought you should know. Trevor got divorced. His marriage lasted 18 months. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. She said, don't be. It was a disaster. Beatrice controlled everything just like she tried to control your relationship. Trevor's ex finally left him for the same reasons you did. She said, Trevor called me last week. He said you were right that day. About everything. About him not being willing to stand up to his mother. About him choosing the easy path over the right one. She said. He asked if I thought you'd be willing to talk to him. Thought about it. Then I said, no. That part of my life is closed. I hope he figures things out, but I'm not the person to help him do it. Ashley said. That's probably wise. I think he's finally starting to set boundaries with our mother, but it's taken him 6 years and a failed marriage to get there. She said, by the way, I got engaged. To someone my mother doesn't approve of. Public school teacher. And I couldn't be happier. I said, good for you. She said, I learned from watching you walk away that day. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept someone else's version of your worth. 7 years after the engagement party, Vertex Foundation hit a major milestone. We'd given away $500 million and measurably improved education outcomes for over 200,000 young people. We celebrated with a gala, a big event with donors and partners and the young people whose lives had been changed by our work. One of the speakers was a college freshman named Destiny who'd been in our very first grant cohort. She talked about growing up in poverty, about the after-school program that changed her trajectory, about now studying engineering at MIT. She said, I'm here because someone believed I was worth investing in. Not because of where I came from, but because of where I could go. Jonah leaned over and whispered, that's the kind of investment that matters. I said, better than any tech company. He said, by far. That night, after everyone had left, Jonah and I sat in the empty ballroom. He said, you've built something incredible here. I said, we built it together. He said, I wrote checks. You built relationships, strategy, impact. This is your work. I said, it started with a helicopter rescue. He said, no, it started with you having the courage to leave a situation that diminished you. The helicopter was just good timing. I said, you gave me permission to value myself. He said, you already valued yourself. I just reminded you of it when you'd forgotten. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then I said, you know what the crazy thing is? He said, what? I said, if Beatrice hadn't made me serve drinks at that party, if Trevor had stood up for me, if everything had gone smoothly, I probably would have married him. And I'd have been miserable. I said, that terrible day was the best thing that could have happened to me. It showed me exactly who they were and gave me the clarity to walk away. Jonah said, sometimes our worst moments are actually doorways to our best lives. I said, especially when you have a brother with a helicopter. He laughed. Always happy to provide dramatic exits. 8 years after the engagement party, I was asked to give a keynote at a women's leadership conference. The topic was, finding your worth beyond others' expectations. I told the full story. The engagement, the party, the drinks, the helicopter, the aftermath. I talked about how easy it is to internalize other people's assessments of your value. How we apologize for taking up space, for having needs, for expecting respect. I said, the day I walked away from Trevor, I chose myself. Not in a selfish way but in a necessary way. I chose dignity over acceptance. I chose authenticity over fitting in. I chose building my own worth over accepting someone else's valuation. I said, And everything good in my life came from that choice. The career, the impact, the relationships that actually nourish me. All of it started when I stopped serving drinks at someone else's party and started hosting my own life. The standing ovation went on for 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of women approached me with their own stories. Of bad relationships, difficult families, situations where they'd been diminished. One woman said, "I needed to hear this today. I've been engaged to someone for 3 years who keeps finding reasons to delay the wedding. I think I've known for a while that he's never going to marry me. But I've been too scared to walk away." She said, "Your story reminded me that staying in a situation that diminishes you doesn't get better with time. It just teaches people they can keep diminishing you." I said, "What are you going to do?" She said, "End it. Today. Before I waste another year waiting for someone to value me the way I deserve." That conversation reminded me why the story mattered. Not because my brother was a billionaire or because he arrived in a helicopter, but because sometimes we all need permission to value ourselves enough to leave situations that diminish us. 9 years after that terrible engagement party, Jonah and I were named to a list of the most influential philanthropists under 50. The article highlighted Vertex Foundation's innovative approach, our focus on measurable outcomes, our willingness to take risks on untested organizations. It included this quote from me: "Philanthropy isn't about making yourself feel good by writing checks. It's about recognizing the dignity and potential in every person and removing barriers that prevent them from thriving." And this quote from Jonah: "My sister taught me that real impact comes from treating people with respect, not charity. From believing in what they can become, not rescuing them from what they are." The article ended with, "The Mercer siblings are proof that sometimes our greatest contributions come not from our successes, but from our willingness to walk away from situations that diminish us and build something better." 10 years after I served drinks at my own engagement party, I hosted a party of my own. A celebration of Vertex Foundation's 10th anniversary. The event was at a beautiful venue, filled with donors and partners and young people whose lives had been transformed by our work. I welcomed everyone with a speech about dignity, respect, and the revolutionary act of treating people as if they matter. No one served drinks but paid staff who were compensated well and treated with respect. Jonah gave a toast. 10 years ago, I landed a helicopter on a lawn to rescue my sister from a terrible situation. Best decision I ever made. Everything good in both our lives came from that moment of choosing dignity over acceptance. As the party continued, I looked around at what we'd built. Not just a foundation but a model for how to use resources with respect. How to invest in people without diminishing them. How to create change without recreating power dynamics that harm. And I thought about that younger version of myself, carrying drinks through a party where I should have been celebrated, accepting treatment I didn't deserve because I was afraid to make waves. She could never have imagined this. The career, the impact, the life built on valuing herself enough to leave. Sometimes the worst parties lead to the best lives. Sometimes humiliation becomes purpose. And sometimes you just need a brother with a helicopter willing to remind you that you're worth more than how other people treat you. Thanks for sticking with this story to the very end. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Drop a like if this moved you, and let me know in the comments about a moment when you chose yourself over acceptance. See you in the next one.